Hi there, I'm Jim Zirin. Welcome back for more conversations. We have a great show for you. Kai Bird is with us. Kai Bird won a Pulitzer Prize for his biography of Robert Oppenheimer. The book was the inspiration for the 2024 Academy Award-winning motion picture. Sticking with biography as his muse, Kai has written a new book filled with spicy anecdotes entitled American Scoundrel, Roy Cohn's dark journey from Joe McCarthy to Donald Trump. Roy Cohn was a disgraced lawyer who happened to light up the town. Among his clients, who included almost every Mafia Don you can think of, political figures and celebrities, was Donald Trump, whom he served for 13 years as political strategist and guiding spirit. Trump became Cohn's apprentice in waging lawfare, the dark art of using the law to cheat or destroy other people. Journalist Ken Auletta said of Cohn, "I have never interviewed a more revolting character than Roy Cohn. He had no regard for the truth." Kai is also a distinguished lecturer at the CUNY Center for Biography. We're pleased to welcome Kai Bird to the program to tell us what made Roy Cohn tick.
Well, thank you, Jim.
Great book. I just loved it. And it's a quick read because every page turns itself. It's so fascinating.
Well, I had a lot of fun actually writing about this villain. It was, every morning was another escapade, another dastardly thing that he had done that I would have to write up. It was oddly fun.
Yeah. Now, you wrote the book with your spouse, Susan Goldmark.
For the first time, my wife joined me on my biography journey.
Is it hard to write a book with one's spouse?
Well, actually, she sped up the process. She did a lot of the research, particularly over mob figures in New York City politics, and she really got into Roy's sex life. So I did most of the writing, and she did a lot of the research and editing, and it went relatively fast. I wrote this book in less than 4 years.
Now, you call Roy Cohn an American scoundrel in the title. Now, scoundrel is a dishonest, immoral person, last time I checked.
Yes.
Now, why did you want to write a book about a dishonest, immoral person? Look at your prior books you write about members of the establishment, John McCloy, Jimmy Carter, others.
McGeorge Bundy, John J. McCloy.
And let's not leave out Oppenheimer.
Robert Oppenheimer. These were all men who were sort of icons of the American establishment, the foreign policy establishment, the law establishment. And they represented the bipartisan sort of consensus in America in the 20th century, particularly men like John McCloy and Mac Bundy. But I suddenly realized 4 or 5 years ago that their world was gone. And in its place was the values and the culture and the political divisiveness of Roy Cohn, who died 40 years ago, but he's been haunting us from his grave, particularly for the last 10 years.
Well, tell us about Cohn. Tell us about his background. Who was he?
Well, he was a lawyer. He was trained at Columbia University.
Child of the Bronx.
Child of the Bronx. His father was a New York State judge.
Political powerhouse, too.
And close to the Roosevelt administration and Jim Farley and that whole New Deal party machinery. But young Roy sort of broke off from his father's politics and dived into this sort of right-wing McCarthyite world in the early 50s. And he became Senator Joe McCarthy's chief counsel.
Well, before that, he became a lawyer, and he joined the United States Attorney's Office.
Yes.
And he latched on to a high-profile case, the Rosenberg Case, and he ran with it.
Atomic Spies.
Atomic Spies. Now, what was his role in that case? He was not the chief prosecutor.
He was an assistant prosecutor, but he was nefarious. He was outrageously, he conducted ex parte conversations with Judge Irving Kaufman. through the back door in the judge's chambers. And he convinced, among other things, he convinced the judge to impose the death sentence on Ethel Rosenberg, who really did not deserve that. And the hope was that by doing so that they would leverage this into getting a confession and cooperation from Julius Rosenberg. Of course, it didn't work, and they executed both of them. And Roy was always proud of it. He said, if I could have, I would have thrown the switch myself.
Now, Roy was a registered Democrat.
He was.
And so he became a right-wing Republican, sort of a MAGA type.
But always sort of a fixer for New York City Democratic municipal officials, like Mayor Abe Beame and others.
Let's just continue with the Rosenberg case for a minute. Were the Rosenbergs guilty?
Yes, the consensus among historians now is that they were guilty, but guilty of sort of rather low-level espionage. It was not very consequential. There were more important atomic spies in Los Alamos.
So the Rosenbergs are convicted by a jury. It goes up on appeal. Ultimately, 3 justices of the Supreme Court found the death penalty sentence was illegal because it was under a different statute. The Rosenbergs became a symbol of left-wing martyrdom.
They did indeed, yes. But Roy was unapologetic. He always thought they deserved what they got, and he was proud of what he had done.
So on the back of the Rosenberg conviction and execution, he sold himself in Washington to Senator McCarthy, who wanted to find communists everywhere, in the State Department, in the Army, everywhere else.
I argue in the book that Joe McCarthy was sort of an empty vessel. He wanted the publicity, and he sort of latched on to the sort of anti-communist conspiracy as a means of generating headlines in the tabloids. But it was Roy Cohn who actually had was the intellectual mastermind behind Joe, and he pushed him into these investigations that resulted in thousands of civil servants in the State Department and elsewhere in the federal bureaucracy losing their jobs, and many of them were homosexuals who were targeted by Roy, who was himself a closeted gay man. It's just the height of hypocrisy, but that's what Roy did.
So while he was with McCarthy, McCarthy had another aide named G. David Schein. And Schein and Cohn took a junket to Europe hunting for books in U.S. libraries abroad that they claimed were written by communists like Dashiell Hammett and Lillian Hellman and Theodore White and others. Now, what was that all about? Was Schein and Cohn lovers?
I argue in the book that they were not. That Schein, who was over 6 feet tall and blue eyes and blonde, he was Roy's type, and Roy was attracted to him. But I argue there's no real evidence that they had a sexual relationship.
Cohn liked tall, blonde, straight men, didn't he?
He did
liked
indeed.
to surround himself
all his life. And that brings us, of course, to Trump, who was his type as well.
We'll get to Trump for sure, but didn't he later say that book-burning junket was a mistake and they shouldn't have done it?
He did acknowledge that there were excesses, but books were burned as a result of that junket through Europe. And it was notorious, it was written up, it got him on the cover of Time magazine in 1953. It was extraordinary.
So where was our Constitution while all this was happening?
This was, a breakdown of civil liberties and norms. McCarthyism, most historians, when I was writing my first biographies, I regarded the McCarthy era as sort of a a low point, an aberration in American history. I've since changed my mind. I think that
it may be a high point.
that it was it's a recurring episode in American history where a nation of immigrants and liberalism in many ways and civil liberties, but occasionally we go through a period of paranoia and resentment against the other, immigrants, race, and this is what happened in the early 50s, and of course we're going through it again today.
And the 50s were not our first Red Scare. We had a Red Scare earlier in that
So it's
century.
a recurring pattern.
A recurring pattern, and we kind of have it today with the xenophobia and the anti-immigrant feeling. But okay, so McCarthy winds up discredited. At long last, sir, have you no sense of shame?
Exactly. That was Joe Welch asking Joe McCarthy.
And he sank into ignominy, and then Cohn goes back to New York and starts to wheel and deal. And then he winds up having some problems with the law. Tell about that.
Yes, he's eventually, in the 1960s, he's indicted at least three times by Robert Morgenthau for bribery, fraud, and he stands trial, and there's loads of evidence that he was guilty, but he gets off.
Never takes the stand.
Well, he never takes the witness stand, but in one of these trials, his lawyer had allegedly a heart attack in the courtroom, just as he was about to give the summation. And so Roy Cohn steps forward and volunteers to do his own summation on his own behalf, although he hasn't submitted himself to cross-examination in the witness box. And he proceeds to have a performance of 7 hours over 2 days in which he brings the jury to tears in depicting himself as the victim. And he gets off. It's incredible. It's the beginning of Roy's sort of brazen strategy of always attack, and never apologize, and attack the judge if necessary, attack the integrity of the judge who is presiding over your trial. And he passed on all of these lessons, of course, to Donald Trump.
So he used publicity as out of court as a weapon to condition the jury, to condition the public, maybe even condition the judge. And he understood the power of publicity in the lawsuit.
Exactly.
It was all part of the game. So there he is, the Teflon scoundrel, indicted 3 times. I think there were 4 trials.
Right.
The first trial was interesting. It was 11-1 for conviction, and then a juror's father died, and he was excused, and so you didn't have a full jury, and there had to be another trial, and of course...
so Roy, in that case, just got lucky.
He just got lucky. Well, he was lucky throughout. So here he has the reputation of an exception to the rule that you can't be, a lawyer represents himself as a fool as a client, because didn't get his personality. He got his personality across to the jury, but no cross-examination. It was a very dramatic moment. And,
right.
It's never been repeated, in my knowledge, in the history of criminal jurisprudence. Okay, so he then starts practicing law, and he has a lot of clients. And here's really the riddle of Roy Cohn. Here's this guy who was a scoundrel. He's detested. He is leading a closeted homosexual life, really a promiscuous homosexual life, which you go into in the book in some graphic detail. And he still attracts as friends politicians, public officials, celebrities,
he was
real estate wheeler dealers like Donald Trump. What accounts for this? He had a magnetic personality, it looks like.
Well, he could be very charming over the dinner table. Barbara
I thought
Walters.
he was a slob. He'd
would
reach
constantly
across to your
picking
plate and
he was stealing food from his guest plates.
That looks good. Let me just
Yes.
spear a couple of pieces.
But Roy could be charming and charismatic in his own way. He was a great gossip. He fed the gossip columnists all the time, stories. And every year he hosted his own birthday party in places like Studio 54 or the New York Armory.
Or on his boat.
And 200, 300 of New York's elite judges, politicians, newspaper people would turn out. George Steinbrenner, the Yankees owner.
Mayor Beam.
Mayor Beam, Rupert Murdoch.
Then Assemblyman Charles Schumer.
On one occasion.
On one
yes.
occasion. And that was the place to be. It was Joey Adams, the gossip columnist, said if you're indicted, you're invited. So mob figures came.
Exactly.
And so here politicians are rubbing shoulders with mob figures and judges.
And everyone knew who Roy was. Everyone knew how nefarious he was, that he had been indicted, that he was obviously guilty, that he had perjured himself on national television during the Army McCarthy hearings, that he was close to the mob, and yet they still came. And it's something about our celebrity culture, and particularly in the 70s and 80s, and I think today too. It's shamelessness, it's this sort of desire to be close to the flame of celebrity, and no one minded showing up and sort of endorsing Roy's odyssey in New York.
It has been said, and maybe you say it in your book, it's certainly been said in other biographies of Cohn and in some of the documentary movies, that Cohn not only represented the mob, he was part of the mob. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, I think so. I describe his relationship with, for instance, Moe Dalitz, a mob figure in Las Vegas. And part of the book is based on 10,000 pages of FBI documents that include, among other things, wiretap transcripts where Moe Dalitz and other mobsters in Las Vegas are talking about Roy and how he's about to be indicted. And he's a business partner of Moe Dalitz. He earned a lot of money through his associations with the mob. And he admired these men. He admired people like Fat Tony Salerno, who was a part of the concrete monopoly in business here in New York. And so when Donald Trump was building Trump Tower, he needed Fat Tony Salerno to be assured of a constant delivery of concrete so that the building would go up on time. And Roy was the connection. He introduced him to Fat Tony.
Other builders were using structural steel because they couldn't get concrete. And
that's right, yes.
At the same time, the concrete poured on Fifth Avenue and 56th Street.
Right.
Let me ask you this, because all roads seem to lead to Donald Trump. How did this relationship start? Where did it start? And how long did it last?
It started in sometime in October 1973 at Le Club, a well-known dining establishment in Midtown Manhattan. And Roy frequented this establishment, and one night Donald Trump showed up and saw Roy sitting at a nearby table. And there are several accounts. I had an interview with Trump, actually, in which he gave me one account where he claimed, last year he claimed this, that it was Roy who recognized the rising young real estate developer who was only 27 and wasn't well known. But in Trump's imagination, it was Roy who recognized him and came over to his table. In him. Yes, and introduced himself. But in fact, I think what happened was the young 27-year-old Trump went over to Roy's table and introduced himself.
He said, I hear you beat the rap 3 times. And,
Exactly. He admired him for having been indicted and getting off.
Yeah.
And then he explained that he had a court case, a problem with the feds who were charging him with discrimination against blacks in his housing projects in Queens. And he didn't want to settle.
Richard Nixon's Justice Department
yes,
charge.
Exactly.
The Trumps with discrimination in housing.
And it was,
This was a civil case.
This was a civil case, and it was clearly a case of gross discrimination, racial discrimination. But Roy told him, you should fight it. Don't make a settlement. And in fact, he persuaded Trump to file a $100 million lawsuit against the feds, which was nothing of a suit, and it was dismissed within 3 months. But
it was a publicity stunt.
It was, again, one of Roy Cohn's publicity stunts, but Trump loved it. And that was the beginning of their relationship. And for the next 13 years, Roy was his go-to lawyer to get zoning variances on his building projects and to arrange campaign financing and to deal with the press. And he taught the young Trump how to deal with the courts, deal with the press, the gossip columnists. Trump he was astonished that he could see Roy's name appearing in the gossip columns in the New York Post or the Daily News literally 2 or 3 times a week. And he wanted this.
But most of all, Cohn gave Trump access,
He introduced him around
the levers of power in New York
exactly.
City, which Trump wanted and needed, and then wanted to leverage under the national scene.
For instance, one of Roy Cohn's closest friends from Horace Mann, the prep school, his high school here in New York, was Cy Newhouse, who was a publishing magnate and owned Random House at one point. And Roy planted the idea with Cy Newhouse in the early 80s, mid 80s, that they ought to give a book contract to Donald Trump to get him to do his memoir about his great success as a real estate developer. Well, of course, this became The Art of the Deal, a massive bestseller that turned Donald Trump, a sort of parochial real estate developer here in New York City, into somewhat of a national figure, and gave him his political platform to decades later after Roy's death, to launch his political career.
Okay, so with all these shenanigans, eventually in 1986, Cohn is disbarred.
Finally.
An order of the appellate division, the very court in which his father sat. And and shortly thereafter, Cohn dies. What did he die of?
AIDS.
He died of AIDS. Did he ever admit it?
He never admitted he had AIDS. He told reporters like Mike Wallace of 60 Minutes that no, he couldn't possibly have AIDS. He was a macho man, and he had liver cancer, but it was AIDS. And he was treated at the National Health Institute in Washington, D.C., where he eventually died. And he got access to early experimental treatment of AZT, for instance, through his relationship with the Reagans in the Reagan White House.
So that's the end of Roy Cohn, but his legacy lives on. So I have a question for you, Kai Bird. And the question is, what does the story of Roy Cohn tell us about our history?
Well, coming back to where we started, I would argue that the establishment that I spent decades of my life trying to chronicle is gone. And in its place is Roy Cohn's kind of divisive politics. And he sort of managed to corrupt our politics, our courts, even the press, where we've all gone down the drain in terms of credibility, and he's the symbol of the politics of Donald Trump, this divisive, racist, often anti-immigrant, very conservative, kind of politics that people like John McCloy, the chairman of the establishment back in most of the 20th century, would have been horrified to see happen. But that's where we are. And if you want to understand the last 10 years of the Trump era, you have to understand that there's a direct line between the Trumpist era and the McCarthyite era. And the line is Roy Cohn.
The columnist Cindy Adams, who was a close friend of Roy's, he was a great source for her, and she was in the hotel in 2016 when Trump realized he'd been elected president of the United States. And it was 30 years after Cohn died, and Trump went over to her and said, "Cindy, if Roy were here, he never would have believed it."
Yeah, well, Trump went over to her.
Yeah, Trump went over to her.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyway, this has been just marvelous, and thank you for coming by. Thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more conversations. Don't forget to download the CUNY TV app so that you can enjoy our programs when you're taking a walk or when you're on the road. I'm Jim Zirin. Thanks for coming by again, and take care and all the best.